This is The Mindful Trainer, the podcast that takes you beneath the reps and routines and into the raw, unfiltered stories of athletes, trainers, guides, and coaches who've battled through injury, burnout, and life's curveballs to come back stronger. I'm your host, Melanie Webb, and every week we peel back the layers to uncover what really shapes a coach, the setbacks, the scars, and the rebuild. Because behind every strong body is a story of resilience. This is where vulnerability meets strength, where training gets personal, and where we stop pretending that we have it all figured out. If you're a trainer, athlete, or anyone who's been knocked down and fought your way back, you're in the right place. The Mindful Trainer, strip back the surface and train deeper. Subscribe now on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Let's get on to the show. I'm joined today by Kelvin Everitt, founder of Next Step Solutions. Kelvin is an ACE-certified personal trainer with a U.S. Soccer D license, and perhaps his most important title of all, he's a proud soccer dad. I've known Kelvin for over 15 years, and every conversation leaves me inspired. I think it's going to have that same impact on you, active listeners and lifelong learners. Kelvin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Melanie. Very excited.
I am so excited to share with the listeners just a little overview of your amazing career. Kelvin, I think it's such a tribute to you and what a hard worker you are. So I'm going to try to do this justice here. Jump in anytime you want to make a correction. Well, listeners, I just want you to meet Kelvin. His career has been marked by working hard, figuring things out and getting things done, and ultimately making a full circle return to the importance of community. It started when you were 14 years old, so a teenager with a megaphone in the town square of your hometown, Ipswich, England, promoting a men's fashion store. I love that story. You witnessed your father's business fail as a result of a major recession in the UK. Hard lessons to learn as a young man. And then you worked up close with blue-collar workers in a factory. Bartended, which I have to confess, I'm very suspicious of anyone who has not worked in hospitality. And then there's about a decade where you begin settling in, like your strength training, you're coaching soccer, you're doing an internship in the US, Camp Walt Whitman in New Hampshire. You ultimately settle on a career in hospitality, ending up in America working hospitality. I want to pick up the story where we cross paths, which is when you led a team of 50 of us private fitness trainers at the Sports Club LA in Washington, D.C., now Equinox, with a revenue goal of close to $2 million in sales. You know, when I saw that number, it reminded me that while being a fitness trainer came first, being good at selling fitness training in that corporate landscape was a very close second. And I imagine you felt immense pressure as the fitness manager, driving all of us as your team and leading us to reach that goal. So this is where your entry into big corporate really begins, it sounds like.
Yeah, that was definitely a culture shock in a lot of ways, because up to that point I'd done various leadership roles. You know, I'd managed a very small hotel in the UK, which was, it wasn't anywhere near the revenues, but definitely was complex in its own way. I'd just been working for another local health club company as a fitness manager and had a successful run for a year or so there. It was very interesting when I went and interviewed for the job. First of all, I just looked at it like an adventure. Hey, let's go out there and see. I had a pretty good idea that some of the approaches I'd been taking previous in my career had been effective. So I kind of had a couple of key things I knew I was going to lean on if I was going to get the job, which was really going to be trying to figure out what support the folks on the front line need, what kind of structure they need, and then, making sure that was all intact. So a lot of time that if you yourself, if you don't have a structure or a methodology, it makes things very difficult, because then you can't really trust that certain things are going to get done, and then that really kind of creates a tough experience for team members to kind of do their best work, right? And that's, at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. So when I came into that position, there were a couple of things that I was able to get into real quickly. One of them was kind of like how the trainers got paid. I know it was very manual at the time. And if you remember, everyone had to fill out those forms, submit those. We had some great people working. I don't know if you remember Jen Easter, who used to she was very passionate, but she didn't quite have the systems in place to be more effective in that. So we implemented, because there were sessions that people weren't getting paid for. So really kind of making sure that was a priority, that people were getting paid for the work they did. How can we make sure that we're organized there, and to set people up to grow their businesses as much as possible? Like, how do we kind of remove friction for people joining the gym to get in front of trainers? How can we kind of individually start understanding the trainers, what their skill set is, and where there may be some opportunities to help them and get better in certain areas. And that wasn't technical stuff, because as you're an example of some incredibly smart, intelligent trainers there. That wasn't the support. They didn't need to know how to prescribe exercise. The support was really around, how can we help them grow and develop their business in a way that felt good? Because up to that point, back in the early 2000s, sales was all about overcoming objections, right? And that a lot of times that didn't feel good. So yeah, that was definitely interesting. But I felt I had a couple of tools that would be useful when I got into that role.
Yeah, and you certainly did. I think back on that time so fondly. And 50 trainers. I try to explain that landscape to people out here, out west, where I am now, right in this small ski town, small private studio. Like 50 trainers full time in our careers, bachelor's degrees, certifications out the wazoo, and all of us busier than you can imagine. To be the leader of a crew like that, all of us very strong personalities too, especially right at that time in our careers, we're like 20s and 30s, and we've got big egos and we're super fit. And it was a rambunctious bunch, but it's also like some of my fondest memories and tightest professional connections are still go back to that time. That it was such a formative landscape for me as a trainer. So you ended up vice president of fitness at corporate headquarters in Boston. And ultimately the executive team, like there was a change in corporate and you guys got let go. And this is where things get even more fascinating to me, and kind of where we reconnected, because I had moved back out west at that point. We start working for more fitness companies on the biotech side, if that's safe to say, ultimately landing at Apple. And when I think big corporate America, I think Apple, right? The big tech companies. And that's where it sounds like the world just opened up to you in terms of being supported yourself and cultivating your own leadership style. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting that, the cultivation piece. Yeah, getting to Apple and having a recruiter reach out to me on LinkedIn when I was kind of trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go in next. Definitely retail was not on my mind. But their whole process and how they engaged was very conversational, and there was a lot of transferable skills that I developed at that point from a leadership standpoint. And you learn that folks, when they go to Apple, when you go into a leadership position at Apple, and I went into a store as like an equivalent of like an assistant general manager, having previously been a VP, well, it's really comparable, because those individual stores, the stores I worked in generated far more revenue than any gym I ever worked at. And you're dealing with a team of like 120, people, full-time, part-time. You've got 5 different areas of the store. You've got you've got the sales piece, you've got the technical piece where you're helping to repair and devices and all that stuff. You've got even the stock management. So there's a whole level of complexity. So you're really it feels like running a business. So there was a lot there I could get my teeth into that I really enjoyed. And at the time I joined the company, Apple, they seemed like they were in a little bit of a transition of trying to figure out how to be better at being Apple. And that was a great time to be there. I got to be involved in a lot of pilot projects and things like that, really kind of embracing the Apple culture. And there were some significant things that I took out the gates, kind of spoke to me. I'll give you an example. There was an idea that when we engage with each other, one of the things that can be challenging when a workplace is that when folks kind of get frustrated with each other, right? So they had this kind of mindset of assume positive intent. Irregardless of the situation, when you're engaging with someone, any teammate, you're going to assume positive intent of them and go into it trying to be open-minded, right? We ask for permission before we ask questions. It's very much a feedback culture, and the goal is to provide good feedback, good quality, not just a positive, but we want to make sure it's specific, but also negative feedback as well, and constructive feedback. But again, being very specific about it with the desire to help people be better at what they do. So it was very interesting, and kind of being a leader in that, and kind of, you're leading other managers to be able to lead their teams. This idea of, you're not now directly leading, you've got to lead through influence. And that's a big part of Apple's culture, is as a manager, they don't lead through compliance. They don't manage through compliance, although if you don't do what you need to do long enough, compliance will definitely come along. but it's really how you're leading through influence instead, because that's what people get motivated by. And, you're trying to help people do the best work of their lives. I mean, that was another catchphrase that we would use. So how do you do that?
I love it. And how long were you there again? And this was in Maryland, right?
This was in Virginia. So I started in 2015, and then I left in 2023. So right around 8 years.
That's a long stint. And where I really love your story and want to talk to you is making that decision to leave Apple to go into this world of fitness and coaching. And I think it's so interesting. I think it's so relevant and timely, and into that thought process that goes through the mind of someone who's a husband and a father and a career guy making this big pivotal decision.
Yeah, definitely, like you just said, a really big decision. Definitely one I would not have made on my own. This was very much a collaborative decision with my wife. All through my career since I moved here in 2005, anything big, we approach it as a team, make sure that we're aligned, and kind of think through the different components of it. And my wife saw that probably in the last year or two at Apple, I wasn't as engaged with the work as I had been when I started. It became a little bit repetitive, like a lot of jobs do. You're on that yearly cycle, what's coming, when it's coming, what you got to do ahead of time. You got the revolving door of employees where you're continuously, you're doing 20, 30 interviews a week, and that becomes your life. But you're also very well compensated at Apple. The benefits are outrageously good, and all that kind of stuff. So from a security standpoint, fantastic. But I was getting to the point, and I'll be honest, I was coming up towards my 50th birthday. It was going to be my 50th birthday that year. I don't know about you. I have a coping mechanism that if I'm not really engaged in what I'm doing, I try and compartmentalize it. And I don't say block it out is the right word, but I kind of like try and mitigate the things about it that I'm not enjoying. But what that does, that brings everything down. So all my energy levels are down at that point. So I'm not necessarily doing the things I enjoy doing or anything like that, but it keeps me functioning, if that makes sense. And I got to the point where I'm like, well, do I want to carry on like this until retirement? Because that's pretty much the path right now. If I just keep my head down doing what I'm doing, this is it. I can tell you what I'm going to be doing in 3 years' time at this month, because that's what we always do. But I had this burning, a little kind of ember, a spark of wanting to get back into doing something that I felt value in. And for me, I really loved my time in corporate America and the experiences and how I grew as a professional, and the influence I got to have on other people's careers. But, I come from a small village in the UK, and there's always a part of me there of like wanting to find a connection to my community. When I grew up, before I did the terrible fashion job and everything, I worked in probably, I don't know, 10 businesses in the village, the local hardware store. I worked in the local news agents back when people bought newspapers. The factory I worked in was in the village. So I kind of had this idea. I wanted to get back to something that was community based, and having parents, being a parent and growing up with my kids in sports, I felt that there was an opportunity to take all my kind of experience with training adults, which was mainly what I've done before, and my experience of that, and maybe and apply that to youth. There's lots of programs out there, but I didn't really find too much one-on-one stuff. And a lot of one-on-one stuff is very much under the radar, referral based. So, I had a really good friend in North Carolina who I'd known for probably 15 years, who had been running his own training business, incredibly successful, very low key. He's out of his garage, converted his garage. He's got really great, his kids are athletics, but he's been training, he's training generationals now. He's training people that have gone to college, they come back training them anyway. And he's like the nicest guy. I haven't spoken to this guy for like 10 years. So I'm like, well, let me speak to Gary. Gary Scott Training, by the way, North Carolina, just outside Charlotte. Look him up. Fantastic. I called him up, and he's the most generous human being. He spends like 2 hours, walks through like his kind of blueprint of how his business works. And I'm like, I could make that work. And he's like, yeah, you can make that work. Spoke to my wife. She's like, I think you should do that. I think your tenure at Apple's run its course, and, we can figure the other stuff out financially. Fortunately, is good at what she does, and we can figure out the insurance, and as long as I earn this amount of money, a certain amount of money where we don't have to dip into savings, then I can step into it. So yeah, that was the decision, and it in some ways it felt like a relief, and in some ways I felt absolutely terrified, more terrified probably than any other change I've made in my career.
Yeah, there's something about that age of 50 and making big changes at that time where your mortality is in view. The stakes are much higher, but like you can see this thread in your life of curiosity, of trying new things, and that's the fabric that makes up
Kelvin, right? So you can see, I can see that quilt work weaving in and out of your thought process and your decision and your trajectory. It's so inspiring and beautiful. And so you start your own coaching practice, and kids sports, we're talking big business these days. Things have changed from when I played, varsity sports in high school in the US. It was like, you attend a couple of camps in the summertime and then you play sports. And nowadays, if you're going to play on the sport or play on the varsity team, well, you might have to be on the coaches club team in the summer. And of course, there's people really running it like a corporate business out there. And talking to you about your coaching philosophy, it was totally different from what I hear from my clients talking about their kids' experience playing sports, right? So I'd love to hear more for the audience. Like, tell us about how your leadership style, how you apply that to your coaching business.
Making sure that I take the time to get to know the athletes. That's kind of like a big part of it. But also understanding when you're working with kids and parents, it's going to take a while. So you're not going to get to know them from that first meeting because they don't know you, don't know them. You've got to keep that in mind, that you're going to gradually kind of chip away a little bit as you kind of have interactions. And so therefore then you have to build a good relationship with the athlete. And just because they're kids, I found that there's a lot of similarities to building relationships with adults. There has to be a level of respect, right? There has to be a level of what I like transparency, sharing why you're doing what you're doing. Trying to pique the curiosity of the individual I found that to be a really powerful way to help them be engaged in what they're doing. And we talk as professionals about the idea of being present. And with kids, especially, there's so many things that means they're not present, that it can be weird for them sometimes to be in an environment where they're being present. So being aware of that and kind of creating the dynamic in the interactions whereby there's an engagement and you're kind of making them a part of the process, I guess, just by helping pique their curiosity and explaining things. For me, though, from a coaching standpoint with the kids, a great resource I found was a guy called Tony Holler. He's an athletic coach out of Michigan. He has a program he created called Feed the Cats. And what I love about him, and I got to see him live last year down in North Carolina, what I love about his program is the goal is to make the training session the best part of the kids' week, right? So if you do nothing else, start there. How can I try and make this a great experience for the individual that's participating? Even before you're thinking results and, everything else. And that can be as simple as, if you notice the kid doesn't have water with them, well, get them some water. Hey, you need some water today? No problem. I got you. Don't worry about it. Engaging with them, there's some strange things with like kids, like you learn that if a kid had a test during the day, they're going to act different if you're training them later in the day. 100%. They're going to show up a little different. So you can kind of tell if they're a little different, just asking the question, hey, you have a test today? And they'll say, yeah, I had a test. So how'd it go? And just little things like that you kind of pick up along the way. But the priority is to try and make this a good experience for the kid, so the kid wants to repeat it, because as you know, consistency is the be all and end all when it comes to making those improvements. So we can program like, very, very technical programming, but if they're not consistent, so we've got to make sure that they enjoy it, and then I think another part, we've got transparency on that. We've got that piece of trying to create an environment that they feel comfortable in. And I like to use the word inclusion. I know it's a word that can be taken in many different directions. But for me, the idea of them feeling like they're a part of something, like their progress is something they are a part of. That way, then what I'm able to bring when I bring them together is like small groups, because sometimes I train them maybe 2 or 3 at a time. I never go more than 3. Everyone's on the similar page, and it's very easy to bring them together, and it's not super awkward and things like that. It's the same when you work with adults. If you want to get better at something, there's a discomfort that comes to it. And the idea of being vulnerable and being okay being vulnerable to an extent is another thing that I think is super important. So it's part of what I'm trying to do with the kids, to create that environment of feeling a sense of belonging, to feeling a sense of like comfort, familiarity, is also then they're willing to be vulnerable. So what does that look like? Well, that's a kid where you set them up with like wickets to jump over, and the kid trips on a wicket, and those things, they fire like you throw them from a catapult. But that could be pretty embarrassing if you're not comfortable making mistakes, right, and being vulnerable. So those are great opportunities, and prefacing them and having them, we're here, we're going to make mistakes, and that's fine, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's fine too. And again, to kind of create that environment for them, so they're going to come back and get the results. So that is my philosophy there, and that was my first thought. The training piece can get real complex, as but I try and keep that relatively simple. Like I say, creating that environment where they why they want to come back is
Wow. Thanks for that overview. It's so comprehensive and emotionally rich territory when you're talking about vulnerability and sense of belonging. It's so innate in our human nature to have a sense of belonging. And I think like you said, it applies to adults. It certainly applies to kids. Like, where do we belong in the world? Like, you never know what's going on in a kid's home or, like you said, in their school. But coaches can be so formative in a child's life. I know in my life, the sports I played, that was the family outside of my family. That was a place where I belonged, the minute I walked on that corridor on that baseball field, nothing else really existed to me. It was a form of meditation for me because I felt such a sense of safety there. Everything about that had to do with the culture that the coach created. I see you going through the thought processes that make that possible. I imagine that in today's landscape, that children and kids also have stressors that I didn't have back when I was playing. It's really cool to hear that explained. And like you said, the word inclusion has some weird connotations right now, but ultimately, in its truest sense, it means making everybody feel like they're a part of something on a team. And really admire those of you still working in a team environment. You sent over a video. You showed me one of your young athletes running, and then I think it was a couple months later, she's running again, and everything looked different. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about how a teenage or a child body progresses through its athletic evolution, and how you see that and how you foster that in children.
Yeah. I love those videos. One of my softball players there, and her goal was to get faster, to get on base quicker. And it's been so cool seeing her journey and how she's starting to get there now. Very exciting for her. Well, so when you're working with kids, and I know that they can, a lot of times they can be an apprehension to work with kids because there's a lot of stuff that's been around a long time that I don't know how much science is behind it, as far as, like, not working with kids, or kids shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that and everything else. And I think, we always want to start with the basis of safety, but a good way to look at a kid is to kind of break them down into different components of their maturity. And I'll give you an example. You're going to have like a training maturity. So how much experience does that youth have of training, right? If they have zero training, well, then their training age is like zero. So that's going to influence how I might program. Okay. Another thing we might look at is, even things like their language they use. They have a little different maturity level there. There's a really cool stuff. When I did my soccer coaching, like USS Soccer, they have a really great resources called the Player Development Framework. And they actually have all of this stuff mapped out, that I was able to kind of transfer a lot of that to my own work with the one-on-ones. So you have the training age, you have the age of their, like, maturity, physical age. What can they physically do? You're going to have their emotional, which, it's funny. You work with a 12-year-old. That 12-year-old may show up like a 10-year-old, or that 12-year-old may show up like a 17-year-old. And they may show up differently on different days as well, because who knows what they had going on. So you'll have that piece to consider. And then you're going to have a look at like their intellectual age as well, like how they're able to understand concepts, how are they able to kind of, and then their language they use. So all of these different things, you're kind of got to kind of take all those into consideration when it comes to working with them. So that's why I chose to work individual, one-on-one, and to work the most I work with is 3. And I have had opportunities to go and do like programs and stuff. And I think those things are fantastic. And I think they are good for people. And there's some great people out there doing great work, but not every kid, that's the best for them, right? So I'm very much trying to stay in my lane and focus on the individuals to the small groups there, because, I'm able to work with the kids that maybe have tried those programs and maybe it wasn't for them and they need a little bit more of a personalized approach to it. See, down at, like, if they're like 10. So pre-puberty, we're probably working just working on like general motor skills. We're trying to kind of build those foundational pieces of like the squat motion, a hip hinge, rotational. We're going through our movements there. We try and make it a little bit more gamified or fun, like. So it's going to be more entertaining and for the individuals doing it, and obviously related to their sport. As they get older, then we're going to start to look at maybe more at we're going to influence add in maybe more of a specific strength focus if that's something we think we need. We may add some complexity to the movements. We might start doing things like, say, complex training, where we're doing a lift and then we're going into a plyo. Things look a little bit more uniform as they get older, but the gamification kind of drifts away, and we're now looking at probably sets, and we're like doing reps or times or things like that. So that's going to look a little different there. We're assessing at the same.
Can I interrupt you there? Just explain gamification for everybody. What does that look like? What does that mean in a training setting?
Of course, yeah. So we with the younger folks, what we want to do, we want to kind of try and maybe make it a game. So say we want to have them, they play a sport. I know they're 10 years old. They play ice hockey, and so we know there's a lot of lateral movement. So we may want to get them doing some lateral bounding. So what we may do is we may, instead of just having them do lateral bounding, I may get a tennis ball and say, okay, I'm going to throw the ball. When I throw the ball, I want you to hop and try and catch the ball. Okay, ready? And we'll count. How many do we get? Fantastic. Once we get to 10, then we can switch it up a little bit. If I'm having them working maybe on some plyo stuff, which is really effective for the younger kids, by the way, the plyometrics, that's where they can really develop that like tendon stiffness that they need to get bouncy.
Somebody else who doesn't know the word plyo, high intensity, how would you explain plyo?
Plyometrics is anything kind of jumping or bouncing. If we're trying to spend as little time on the ground as possible, or we're trying to be explosive in our movements, we're trying to move fast, and we're trying to do it with minimal kind of setup. If we're looking at strength may be, we're trying to add more of a load, but we may not be moving as fast. Whereas plyometrics is all about how are we moving fast? How are we able to move fast, and how are we able to kind of be explosive, which gives us bigger range of motion. So how high can we jump? How far can we jump? Those kinds of things. And the younger kids respond really well to that. It really helps with neurologically with their coordination, believe it or not. But you may have, so I may be making it games, throwing balls around. We may have them, and instead of having them hopping over wickets, I may set it up so they're kind of, it's like a maze, and they've got to hop here, go sideways here, go sideways here. I may set out like cones with tennis balls on them, so they have to hop, go far enough to be able to grab the ball, bring it in, that kind of thing. So it keeps them kind of engaged and makes it more of a fun experience, I guess.
It sounds super fun. Those you're training and enhancing their development of critical sport performance skills, right? Speed, agility, quickness, explosive powers, lateral movements. And I'm always explaining this to my clients that like our modern world takes place in front of us, but the real world and especially sports, there's a rotational plane, lateral movements that have to be, that muscle memory has to be there and in order to perform well in your sport. I imagine that's a lot of fun to watch the progression in kids over time.
It's really cool, Melanie. And what's really cool is a lot of times it happens quickly because it's a neurological thing. It's not a muscular thing, which is what blows my mind. It's funny. You can have someone perform better because neurologically they've developed a better way of like doing a squat motion, and that now immediately transitions into their sport. So now they're able to move faster and move more quickly and to decelerate, because as we know, any dynamic sport, deceleration is really the key to like that injury prevention and to be able to kind of those quick changes in directions. But you know how much force the body has to absorb in order to change direction. But neurologically they start putting stuff together differently, and then they're moving differently, and that can happen within a session. That's what's bananas about that.
Wow. Yeah, that's so exciting. That has to be super fun for the kids too, to see the results that quickly. And I'm curious, like, how do you work with the kids where that may not happen so quickly, or the skill development, they're pre-puberty, or maybe they're entering that puberty phase? Like, what advice would you give to parents working with kids who may be a little discouraged because they're behind where they see their peers?
Yeah, that's such a great call out, because that is 100% reality, especially when you start getting into those like what would be like 6th, 7th, 8th grade. The kids can be at very different levels of maturity. I think a couple of things in that. I think as a parent of a kid, if we're looking at kids that play sports, there's going to be times when if you're thinking that the other kids are farther ahead and your kid's not quite there yet, just know that kids pop, and I like kids pop at different ages. And one of the most detrimental things we can do is create a situation with the kid where the kid quits before they've popped. And so you may have a kid who's like 11 or 12, and maybe at 11 they were fast, and then the other kids caught up and your kids kind of stayed still. And now the other kids are maybe faster or better or whatever it might be, and now your kid isn't as prolific or as they were. You got my wheels spinning here. As a parent, we always want to make sure that we're supporting our kids in a way that they want to continue the sport, unless they don't want to continue the sport, not because they're not enjoying it. So we can help them with that piece, because it may be next year, kid, that's the year your kid just, it hits for the kid and the kid pops. Now, if they quit the year before, they're never going to have that experience, and a lot of kids, they quit every year. Kids just drop out. That just is a reality as they start to get older. So I think, understanding that everyone matures at different levels. So then you say, okay, so what can I do if my kid isn't, and my kids aren't dumb. They know that their teammate is a prolific at something, or is fast or strong or everything else, or they're playing a team, they get knocked over a lot. Then you're looking at them and saying, okay, so we're going to build some foundational stuff here, and we're going to work on consistency and building habits and building mindset. If we can build that consistency mindset where they're focused on the process, not the outcome, right? Then that will stay with them, and that's transferable sports into life, right? And I think that's why a lot of athletes, high-level athletes, are successful outside of sport, like yourself, because you've developed that skill set, right? You develop the ability to work at something, not focused 100% on the outcome, but focus on the process, because that's what discipline is. There's a lot of work you can do with kids, helping them understand consistency is the important thing. Finding the successes, because there are successes. They may not be, okay, well, we've managed to increase our speed, but I guarantee you there's a success of, like, we're a lot more stable on one leg now. We're able to go maybe a little bit longer. Look at our posture now. We started off, we were like this, and now we're doing it a lot more like this. We've got a lot better core strength right now, right? We started off, we weren't able to do this. Now we can do this. Helping them identify their wins. And again, I look at that as a really good transitional skill to life, because we would call that reflection. And even as an adult, how many of us struggle with reflection? It's really hard to reflect. It's really hard, number one, to get the time to say, okay, I'm going to assess what's been going on and try and process it. But also being able to do it in a constructive way is really tough, because as soon as we start assessing anything negative, we can start to beat ourselves up, and it's tough to be objective. And I think, that again is something that we can, with the kids, we can help them build that skill. But we don't come out and give them a course on being reflection. We come out and help them reflect by, helping them identify where their wins are, helping them identify, okay, well, if that wasn't a win, how would you like that to have been different? We can do it through questions. There's a thing in US soccer where the most detriment, or the most critical part of the soccer game, the most critical part for your kids' experience and whether they're going to continue, is the car ride home. It's the car ride home with the parents, and how are the parents engaging with their athletes in the car ride home? Are they, talking about the things they missed, the shot they missed? Are they using questions? Hey, how do you think it went? And reaffirming or reassuring them, hey, I just love to watch you play.
Right.
As a parent, I just want to see you play. I come out and see you play. Fantastic. Obviously, the better you play, the more you enjoy it, the more I enjoy it, because I'm watching you, and then helping them reflect on that, as opposed to it becoming like an interrogation or do you know what I mean?
Oh, I know what you mean. So much juicy content in all of what you just said. Like, in this highly competitive world, and anyone who's self-selecting to play a sport has a bit of competitiveness in them. And that's on a spectrum too, right? You can always look out on a field or on a court and see the kids who just have it, right? It's like in their DNA, and they just want that ball every play. And then you see the kids that are just super happy to be out there. And we've watched that in my own family among my nieces and nephews. I grew up in a highly competitive family. All of us athletes, and we just had so much fun with that. And we'll watch the nieces and nephews and be like, "Oh, there it is," or like, "Yeah, this one just the spark isn't there, but there they are, and their skill sets are amazing." And I love you talking about how there's a place for these kids no matter where they are, and how much parents can make or break that mindset, right? Like, and I know that it's a highly competitive world as far as parents are concerned too. And like, is my kid getting enough playing time, right? Your kid's 11. Like, maybe every kid should be getting playing time at that age. You know what I mean? And the mindset of an athlete and the way that transfers in life, in every setting. You can show up to your job highly competitive, but it's based on your performance and how you show up. It's not based on competing against your peers. At least that's how I experience it. And I can trace all of my successes in my working life back to sports and what it taught me. We're going to go back to the business side of things now. I want to hear you talk more about the single word of mouth review that changed everything for your practice and how important that was.
It's funny, even as you get older and you have experience, there's stuff comes along that just blows your mind. I guess that's one of the cool things about life. So I was gradually building my business. It was a slow burn. I was really wanted to focus on word of mouth, and I wanted to focus on referrals. I avoided a lot of things like websites and things like that. I have Instagram, but other than that, it was really about, trying to build through word of mouth, because I want to work with people that I want to work with, and I want to make sure I'm a good fit for the people that I'm meeting with. When anyone reaches out to me now, the first thing I said, well, let's have a conversation and make sure I'm a good fit, because I have my thought process, my philosophy on this, but hey, that may not be for everyone. There's other stuff that's time tested that has worked for some people that isn't necessarily how I see the world. But I started working with a few different kids, and then they kind of, they're friends, and I have a great neighborhood here and with lots of kids in my neighborhood. So some of the folks I knew started to have their kids work with me. And what was interesting was a few of those kids weren't working with me because they have athletic aspirations, but because they were still, there was still an element of readjusting after COVID and all of the challenges that brought to kids, and how it changed school, very, that lost year type thing, and how that impacted them socially. And they felt like the kids were struggling. And there were several folks I worked with. Their doctors have said exercise is a really great way to help, right? Maybe some challenges that the kids are having processing and trying to make sense of everything. So I was able to kind of work with some folks in the neighborhood. And then one of the moms who I was working with, a couple of her sons, we have a local Facebook page for the neighborhood, and she posted he'd been working with me, and she'd seen a change and seen the positive impact of that. A lot of these kids, even the kids that aren't athletic, there's still an element as they go through certain ages of like a physical piece of it. Like, you have kids that don't want to wear short sleeves. They don't feel like they want to show their arms. And it's, it's not because of an aesthetic thing, but it's how they're finding their place. That is a challenge for them. So she posted on there that she'd seen a lot of positive changes, and if anyone's interested in the information, it's a local trainer, he's in the neighborhood, he's a parent. And I think she got something like 56 responses, like not just likes, but actual people. And she reached out to me, was like, hey, is it okay if I share your information? I'm like, yeah, please go ahead, absolutely. I was totally mind blown, but she touched a nerve on something that a lot of the parents was on their mind at the time. I was able to over double my client base within a few weeks, which was incredible. But also, and what's interesting now is as we get towards the summer, that's when parents are starting to think about more about what their kids are going to do, any activities or anything like that. I think the subject matter touched people because, they could relate to that.
I really appreciate how that could make or break a business, right? Just that one step of giving somebody a shout out and highlighting something positive that came from your work and doing what you're here on earth to do at this time. I've really learned a lot from you. Thank you for contributing your wisdom and knowledge to the podcast today. I would love it if you want to share with people where they can connect with you, how they can learn from you. Go for it.
Thank you for the invitation. This has been fantastic. Same, whenever we talk, I always get something out of it. I do most of my stuff through Instagram. So I have Kelvin_Next Step Solutions. Just go there. It's open. Come and see some of the videos. Everything I have on there is with the permission of the parents. I don't name names or anything like that, but you can come and see some of the work that the athletes I work with are doing. A lot of it's within my garage space, but also we're doing outdoor stuff now. So you get to see them doing some stuff out on the wickets and outside and what have you. So yeah, if anyone would like to come and have a look and leave a comment or have questions, or I'm always looking for other people's stuff too. So if anyone has anything that's really cool, or think that I would be interested in seeing, do that too, because surprising when you find stuff and it's very, be like, oh, that's interesting. I have to try that out.
Yeah, it's fun to collaborate.
Yeah.
It's fun and with this social world that we live in, it's possible too to learn from people across the country. We'll include your Instagram handle in the show notes. We're going to have a transcript up on the website. Kelvin Everitt, thank you again for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate you.
This episode of The Mindful Trainer is brought to you by Hammer Nutrition, fueling athletes with clean, effective sports nutrition since 1987. Whether you're training for your next big adventure, recovering from an injury, or just trying to feel your best day to day, Hammer has your back with science-backed products that support sustained energy, mental focus, and optimal recovery without the sugar crashes or artificial junk. Personally, I rely on Hammer's endurance fuels and recovery tools to power through long hikes, bike rides, and everything in between, especially on adventures like my recent trek below the rim in the Grand Canyon. Visit hammernutrition.com/Melanie9160 to take 15% off your first order.